All right, so in this video, we're going to go over the concept of inverses. And what basically this means is it's basically changing the perspective of the inputs and the outputs. So let me just write that down first, is changing the perspective of the inputs and outputs. Okay, so previously we generally see things something as, say, inputs, and we want to see what the outputs are. So you put the inputs in the independent variable and you want to see what the outputs are. The inverse does the exact opposite, where we have the outputs as our independent variable and we want to see, well, what were the initial inputs? You know, what did we put inside in order to create the output? So it just helps us give a different perspective. Let me give you an example to sort of clarify this. So say, for example, so here's, let me just, it's not the smoothest line. Let me just do this. Give me a second here. Here we go. And I need a white. There we go. Okay, so say, for example, I have a line like that. I have a line like that. Okay, and there we go. So say, for example, I'm looking at grades as my output variable, and here is the number of hours that a student basically spends in order to get a specific grade. So let's just say you want a grade of 7, okay, and we can see that basically as a student, let me use a different color. So let's use yellow. So as a student is basically studying and they sort of reach a peak. So basically, let's say they work about, say, a maximum of 2 hours, or say they work for 2 hours, they're pretty much guaranteed a 7. And any more hours they work really doesn't really help increase their grade because grades are obviously capped. So say, for example, you wanted to see things from a different perspective. You wanted to see things, well, you know, in order to, if you get a specific grade, how many hours do you actually really need to work? So what we would do in that case is we would sort of look things from an inverse point of view. So in other words, if I have this and I have that, so now instead of grades as the output, we have hours as the output, and what we'd have as the input is grades, right? And so how would that graph look like? That graph would actually sort of flip on its own. So in other words, as the number of hours is increasing, the grades are increasing. So so what that would look like is something like this. Would look something like this. So here, for 0 hours of work, you get like a basic grade. So for 0 hours of work, you would get a basic grade over there. And it would sort of increase and then go like that. So here, what would happen is if you wanted a grade of 7, basically, you'd have to work like 2 hours. So it's sort of a flipped perspective of how we can basically look at our outputs and see what were the inputs required in order to get that grade. So in other words, if you wanted a grade of 7, you would really just have to work for 2 hours. You can work for more hours. Say, for example, you can work for 3 hours here, or say, let's say that's 4 hours. You can work for 4 hours there, and you would still get the same grade because grades are capped. And same thing over here. If I wanted to look at it this way, I could see that if I worked for 4 hours over here, I would just basically get sort of a capped grade at 7. All right, so that's basically the concept really of inverses. And in the next video, I'm going to show you strategies for finding the inverse if we actually have different functions. So stay tuned.